bitches. Bitches.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the session. Thanks to all the friends who showed up. I had to ping them that you better show in my session, so thank you. My name is Peter Singh. I'm with the Toronto District School Board. If you're not familiar with the education sector, we look after all the school system in the city of Toronto. Around 250,000 kids go through our schools every single day. But today I have an opportunity to be with two brilliant individuals to actually talk about inside threat we all experience, or we forecast, or we believe it's happening. We wanted to actually get more insight into it. Before we get into the topic itself, let's do a formal introductions. Over to you, Jassi, first.
Good afternoon, everyone. You guys can hear me? Yes. Perfect. Jassi Kaur, Head of IT and Security for Bulk Barn Foods. If you don't know Bulk Barn Foods, you need to check it out. It's basically a specialty retail where you can buy pinch or a pound. So you can go in there and buy spice as pinch, or you can buy a whole bottle of it. But that being said, my role within the organization is to basically create a digital strategy for the organization around IT and security that aligns to the business objectives for the next 5 to 10 years. Pass it to Lynsey.
My name is Lynsey, Lynsey Wolf, and I am the global lead investigator for DTEX Systems. We specialize in detecting insider threat behaviors and escalating those behaviors to a variety of organizations. My main role is assisting organizations to either further the success of their insider threat programs or begin implementing insider threat programs by studying the behaviors of their organizations and pinpointing on abnormal behaviors, malicious behaviors, sometimes even negligent behaviors. But my specialty is investigating insider threat and being able to identify and detect on it.
I just want to be honest that I do love bulk barns because options you have when you walk around, you do get distracted. And I don't know if you experienced the bake shortage during COVID? No? Okay. I did. Couldn't find enough. Getting back to the topic, let's set up the baseline today. What does the inside threat means to us? So every one of us might have a different definition. I think for our discussion, we want to set up a baseline. With that, Lynsey, could you share what you mean by inside threat?
Yeah, so insider threat can kind of cover a multitude of things. And basically it comes down to the organization as a whole. Every person that has access to privileged data or at once had access to privileged data is a potential insider threat. And how that works is these threats could come off as malicious, meaning there's some sort of intent to harm the business or harm someone else in the business. Or there is negligent intent, meaning there may be a lack of education or the lack of knowledge that they may be doing something bad or something that might hurt the business. So it's really challenging to pick one definition that fits all as far as insider threat goes, because the entire risk of an insider event happening covers your entire organization. There's opportunity from anyone in an organization to become that insider kind of event, depending on the intention is how we'll track certain behaviors in order to identify when someone may be becoming an insider threat or an insider event has already happened due to behaviors leading up to it.
No, thank you for that clarification. Jassi, what do you think is an inside threat for a bulk barn?
I think for us is that any user that within our organization touches anything within our environment is an insider threat risk at the end of the day. We have to be very careful in terms of, when we're setting up any users, when it comes to new users that are no longer within the organization, anything around a user aspect, I would say, is internal threat for our organization. So we have to monitor, we have to make sure we're looking at the patterns, we have to make sure there's proper access controls and policies when it comes to users. So anything around user that is within the organization, I would say is for us is a threat, internal threat.
No, thank you for defining that one. Jumping on the next question, what are the key factors to keep in mind when it comes to insider threat risk management piece? And the part two of that question is, how can an organization develop a formal insider risk program to increase visibility from a risk perspective? It could be an inside careless job, malicious actor, or a partner. Lynsey, could you take us through a formal risk management program?
Yeah, so it can be a bit challenging to implement some sort of program like insider threat, in the fact that in many cases what I see a lot of organizations do is stick it under some bucket. It could be any area that already exists in the security space, but they'll either send over to their security operations center, their SOC. They might send it over to risk and compliance. They might send it over to access controls, security controls. But in reality, an insider threat program doesn't really sit comfortably under an existing piece of your security infrastructure, because it's something that it's not built in incident response, which is what we're so used to doing today. For me, the most successful programs that I've seen is actually building out something separate in insider threat, which I know can be difficult, especially for smaller organizations. Obviously, everyone has an issue with bodies and being able to actually fund this type of program. But as long as you have some sort of dedicated program to actually look at insider threats from an insider threat perspective versus from an incident response perspective, it assists in actually building the success of that program. So when I work with organizations, I usually explain that the first thing you need to do is understand your data and understand your users. You really need to have a look into how users are interacting with your current security controls, how users are maybe getting around those security controls. When are users, leveraging certain tool sets that you allow? When are users leveraging tool sets that you don't allow? And it's how those tools are being used and what tools are being used. So understanding your data set as well as understanding your user population is key in building out a successful program. So even if it does sit under some sort of other infrastructure piece that you already have in place, it's more based on the human behavior aspect rather than the technical data set.
And just to add to that, when you're doing these programs, you have to make sure there's collaboration between different departments. That's HR, legal, finance, to make sure that these programs are actually implemented within the organization. Because if you're going to do this as a silo departments, what happens is that it does not, you can't get that full effect throughout the organization. That's why you have to make sure that you're involving, there's a cross-functional collaboration within your departments, within your organization as well.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that, because especially looking at, what I'll do is I will look at endpoint data. So I have a bunch of data that I'm looking at and it's all coming from endpoints, but sometimes there's other pieces to understand the actual user. So we use peer grouping at DTEX with a lot of our analytics. So we can actually identify when users are working in finance, or when users are working in marketing, or users are working in security. All of those different groups of people are interacting with your privileged data very differently and separately. So in order to understand better how these users are operating on a regular basis is to understand what their roles are, but then pulling in information from HR, like if you have users that are at risk. A lot of insider threat cases come down to users that may be unhappy, that may want to, again, harm the business. So if HR knows of users that may be getting let go, if you have big layoffs coming on, or you've identified a user that's leaving the organization, it's different from targeting these users, because what we're trying to do is ensure that the data that they're accessing is still staying within the realm of the organization itself and not being sent elsewhere. So when we're looking at HR data, I don't actually care what the user's problem is. I don't really care what the user did or where they're going, what the issue is. I just need to know from an HR perspective, are they leaving? Are they disgruntled? I don't need the specifics, but that increases their overall risk as a user itself. So bringing in that type of data and working with your other organizations, but still keeping insider threat under a separate bubble is key to the success of programs.
And I think another thing that, just to add to that example, is that sometimes users are moving within the organization, and I think the challenge that a lot of the organizations run into is that when you're going from one department to another, there's a lot of access that they did have, they do not require that moving forward, but at times it gets missed. So if you have that collaboration within the HR teams, you're able to kind of dictate, okay, this is their job function, these are their roles and responsibility, how do you dictate that along the way? So I think it's very, very important for us to have that collaboration within the different departments.
Access controls is something that I deal with on a regular basis. A lot of my organizations that I work with will say, well, we block that, or they don't have access to do that. But that's the entirety of insider threat. I want to know when that user that's not supposed to have access does have access, when they've circumvented the controls that you have in place and they've been successful in that attempt. So many of my organizations will say, I don't want to escalate that, I don't need to alert on that because we block it. We have these controls in place. You should be thinking of all the controls you do have in place and focusing on those as your use cases, because it's instances when those things are circumvented or those things no longer work that you start to see the actual threat that it is an insider. Because if someone, again, has moved laterally within the business, maybe they've had all of this access and maybe they were demoted, and at that point in time they may lose access that they once had before. But if you don't monitor your access controls and they all of a sudden do have the continued privileged access, that would be someone that you'd want to watch for in case that they have these privileges that they no longer need. So again, it's not looking about what controls you have in place, but it's looking for those instances when those controls may not be working.
Thank you for sharing the details. A little bit around TDSB. When we talk about inside threat, we have external threats. Inside is the students we actually educate. And some of them are really smart. By the time they get to grade 9 and 10, they want to experiment a lot. So we actually start to experience attacks because they download these tools, put it on their laptops, bring it in. Now they want to test us, right? So just a unique perspective. Sometimes when you're in college and universities, you're dealing with grown-up adults in a way, 18 plus. But in our case, these are young individuals from 6 years old who are iPad smart to grade 12s. So for us, it's a very balancing act. How can we still protect them, at the same time open up space for them? So a little bit different perspective for us when it comes to inside threats. I'd like to hear your stories. If you have a story to share for your inside threat, or something you went through as an organization, or some of the things you might have in play right now, if you're open to share. You don't have to name your organization, but love to share the experiences. We don't have any brave souls? Oh, there is one. Eric, if you're ready for the mic, please. Yeah. Right there, back there.
So not so much sharing my experience, but I because when we deal with internal threat situation, we mostly approach it from an educational point of view. So I'm just wondering, from what you just talked about, is the program that you have in mind, does it go beyond educational aspect of it? Is it that you would like to find about these use cases, these people at risk in the organization, to apply more control against them, to have more visibility or collect more data from them, or apply more restrictions to them, or simply provide them with education?
Is that for me or?
Anybody on the panel?
Go ahead.
No, I guess from our perspective is that obviously you want to know what the risk for the organization is. Depending on the risk, you do want to monitor it to make sure, at the end of the day, reputation for the business is very important. So, education is very important, and I think education has to start from the executive level. You have to educate your users. You have to get, one of the things that I've done within our organization is find our champion users that really understand the risk to the business and kind of work with them. For example, our legal counsel. Anytime there's an article about any cyber threat, I tend to share with her. Her and I will get on a call, we'll have a whole discussion around it, whereas she will go ahead and educate the other executives as well, saying, okay, this is what we're dealing with. And it's always a win-win situation for us then. We're able to get what we need when it comes to cybersecurity initiatives at the end of the day. So that being said, I think training is very important. Education is very important. It has to start from top down. And executives have to be on board with the policies, procedures. They really have to enforce that. That's one, and I think at the same time, if you see the risk within the business, you have to monitor, you have to evaluate it, and if that user needs to be, there might be a conversation that's needed with the user. You would have to take those actions depending on what the risk level is for your organization.
I think it also, while education is very important, it definitely goes beyond just an educational level as well, as you said. So I completely agree that it needs to be top down. I think that you should treat any user the same as far as from a risk perspective goes. Just because you're the CEO doesn't mean you don't have the potential to be an insider risk. One thing that I do is I look at large data sets all day long. I almost never have any understanding of who you are within that business. So when I'm looking at the CEO or I'm looking at the lowest tiered analyst, it doesn't matter to me, because what I'm looking for is how has your behavior changed over time, and how can I pinpoint on why that behavior might have changed and what you're doing with that changed behavior. Again, it does not matter to me, but as far as from an education standpoint, I think that the current training methods aren't working. And that's something that we're exploring right now, working on with a few different organizations on implementing a variety of different types of training options. What I've seen is that doing things in like tabletop exercises or encouraging users to participate in a potential like fake event, things like that, is better than sending out a PowerPoint answering some questions at the end of the day. A lot of times those questions, it's the same one every year, a little bit different, and everyone just checks the box. That's not really training at the end of the day, if you really think about it. One thing that I've also looked into is kind of participating in conferences like these, is have your people go to these conferences or teach them about the types of threats that are out there. One thing that we use in a lot of our organizations is something called teachable moments. So it's for those times that a user is being negligent. Say they've accessed a site they're not supposed to, they're on social media, or maybe they're downloading pirated content because they're working the overnight shift and they want to watch a movie. What we do is, instead of berating that user or whatnot, we send them a message. Could be an email, could be a pop-up, just to let them know, hey, this goes against our acceptable use policy. Just in the future, make sure you're not accessing these sites, especially if they've gone around controls and accessed a site that might have been blocked. So again, instead of alerting that user and they get reprimanded or they get points off, whatever it might be, that how that works in your organization. Again, instead of making that user suffer, it's more about the education. So it goes beyond the traditional method of educating a user, but lets them know that they've been doing something that goes against policy without them having to feel as though they've done something bad. Because again, it could be from a malicious standpoint, but almost always when I talk to these types of users, it's always from, oh, I didn't know we weren't allowed to do that because I have access to do it. So again, it is about sometimes realizing that the users aren't actually truly being malicious, they just don't know.
And I would agree to the training part, because normally what happens, we have a yearly cybersecurity training, everyone just kind of goes through that for 30 minutes, it's check boxes, and that's all it is. And what we've done actually this year is we've done tabletop exercises, which no one really knew we were running, and we actually held one within the organization, and the response we had from the users was extensive. Like what they needed to do and how quickly they responded was amazing to see. Not because they had the cybersecurity awareness training. Another thing that we have been doing within is it's called Techie Thursday. If anyone wants to kind of come out, so that's not just for anybody within IT, but everyone from the organization. We hold the session for an hour where it's donuts, coffee, everyone comes in, we talk about some of the technologies, what are some of the threats that are out there. So everyone and the funny thing is we have people from finance, we have people from HR that are interested in attending and learning more to see how they can protect the organization. So we know at the end of the day, those are our champion users, and we use them to kind of rotate within the organization and create that more and more awareness within the organization.
Thank you for the question.
Question to the panel about if you do detect insider threat activity, any considerations for sharing and partnering with either law enforcement or intel within Canadian society?
I'm American, so can't really speak to what I do within Canadian or from that perspective. But I can tell you that from my perspective, or from DTEX's perspective, is we are working on information sharing and actually understanding. So I come across a multitude of insider threat use cases on a regular basis. And sometimes, they'll be surprising to me, or sometimes they'll be something that I've known about for quite some time. With that, what we're trying to do is share those types of incidents without giving away too much, but being able to share that this happened. I mean, you see it all the time with news articles and people publishing, but you don't really get the details of what the event happened. Usually it's the individual's name, or so-and-so did this. What we're kind of looking for is the profile that exists behind it. So what I work with on a regular basis is our insider threat kill chain, and there are certain steps that users take in order to actually accomplish a true insider event. So what I'd like to see happen is more sharing about those kill chain steps versus this piece, the exfiltration piece or the compromise piece. Honestly, at the end of the day, I don't really care that something's already been exfiltrated. I don't care that something's already been compromised, because ultimately it's already happened. What I can do now is remediate the issue, and sometimes we do have to work with law enforcement in order to do that. But what I'm more concerned with is what led them up to completing that task, or what led them up to being successful in that attempt. So it's those types of steps that I want to see share, and talk about the actual profiling behind insider threat and the behaviors that go along with it.
So that's something our organization, so for those of you who don't know, I'm with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. I represent our Toronto office. We do work with private sector, so if you are close here, obviously interested in insider threat, we will work with you on stuff like that, especially when we have reason to suspect or concern that there's state level involvement in the insider threat. And people in Canada go, well, why would any hostile state be interested in us? The geopolitical climate of today, if you are anywhere close to anything technically related, those threat actors from a geopolitical perspective are interested in us. So with Intel, it's confidential. We will protect the corporate liability risk, so it's not like going into the public forum where law enforcement may expose a corporation to the public court system. But just wanted to plug that out there, is from an insider threat, we're also here assisting the private sector in Canada.
Terry, thank you very much for sharing that information. I think that is extremely important. And extending your question, our experience has been, if we're experiencing this as some damage has been done against our organization, there has to be policies and procedures and protocols in place as an organization. So you follow those. But if there's been a data breach and serious damage done, we're also obligated to report it to Privacy Commissioner of Ontario. So that formal process kicks in. And that's where you reach out to your privacy office, your legal department, to make sure they're engaged. And that might get extended to even your insurer, if it's a cyber related. So there's a lot of things gets activated once you find those things out itself too. So it's not just something we can just brush aside. And I think all big organizations, even small ones, have obligation to take some action when they experience something like that. I don't know if Bulk Burn has something to share.
No, I think what you mentioned, Peter, we have the same thing. We have policies and procedures in place when it comes to cybersecurity, anything around cyber threats or anything within the organization. And obviously, we work with our legal very closely when it comes to these incidents. And from there on, cyber insurance is also involved, and based on that, we make our decisions.
No, thank you for actually putting a program together to mitigate the risk. What has been your experience around collaboration with HR, legal privacy office, what is the role they can play in this space? How can IT reach out to these, I will call subject matter experts, to help to mitigate the overall risk for the organization?
For us, I think one of the things that I've done within Bulkborn is create that collaboration within the executive team, kind of bring them up to speed with what's happening around the world, educate them on, it's not just the cybersecurity awareness training that they need to be educated on, it's everything else that's happening around them as well. So, we have monthly meetings where we kind of go through some of the challenges that within each department that we're facing. And, and when it comes to cybersecurity, we kind of give them incidents that have happened and where the causes were and how these incidents happened, kind of give them, for them to be aware of the situations. The collaboration, I think, has been the best part for us because the business understands the risk and they have been able to communicate that within their teams. And they have been, for example, we've been running the phishing exercises through on a month-to-month basis within our organization. And, there are certain users that keep clicking on that email every time that comes through. Again, users are our biggest threat at the end of the day, right? It doesn't matter how much you educate them. And we tend to do it in a way, like, for example, we did one right before Christmas, which was from Canada Post. And I cannot tell you how many people clicked on that Canada Post email because everyone was expecting packages. Then it becomes awareness training is like, are you using your personal, your business account as receive personal packages at the end of the day. So I think that's when, we work with each of the business leaders, have a conversation with them so that they can educate their team to understand what the risk for the business could be if that was a real threat at the end of the day. So for us, it's been nothing but beneficial.
No, thank you for sharing that example. I know for us, the DocuSign has been a favorite phishing email. A lot of people clicked on that one last time it went out. It's funny that after a while in your shop, you will figure out that these set of individuals will always be exposed to these emails because you don't have what I call digitally fluent staff in the organization. For us, it's 42,000 staff members. How do you figure out from janitors to all the way the teachers and the execs are all digitally fluent, they understand it? So a lot of work needs to happen to build that, I will call human intelligence in the organization. That's hard work, that's grunt work. But I think having a proper risk management program or you have enterprise risk management framework in place, this inside threat becomes a very important subset of that program. So that's extremely important. I know this morning I was waiting when the word AI will be used at this conference. It was 11:06 when I first heard AI in this organization, in this conference. So coming back, because AI has taken the IT universe by storm, I wasn't sure if there is something that you have experienced in your space that, yes, you can leverage AI to also mitigate some of these things. I don't know if you have any examples to share with us. Lynsey, you want to go first?
Yeah, funny enough, we were talking about this a little bit before the panel, but AI is something where it's a very hot topic now. A lot of people are wondering, how do I use it? Can I use it? Should I be using it? And what I've seen with the organizations that I've worked with, and again, this is across industries, and you're either, on one hand, yes, we're using it, we're trying to restrict the use of it, but we have success using it. On the other hand, the other extreme is no, we block it, we don't want anyone using it, it's not safe. So I think right now, for the time being, it's one of those extremes at this point, only because there's so much unknown to it and AI is growing so rapidly that it's really difficult for us to keep up. I think if we come back to that education piece, education around AI is something that I feel needs to be separated from your regular cybersecurity awareness training, only because the way in which it's being utilized could be, trying to help the business, but if you could be using it to help the business, but on top of that, giving away, business secrets. And that's the thing that people don't understand about AI is that whatever you're giving to it is actually helping it learn. So when you're uploading, that set of code, or you're uploading that business project and asking for it to summarize it for you or finish a project, it now has access to all of those pieces to help it give you some sort of product, but now you've just exposed your own private data out there. Some of the things that I work with in my organizations is, set up some sort of sandbox environment or have your own AI tool that you kind of manage internally. But educate users on the use of it and have them play around with it and use it in a way that you're not actually giving it access to your own business data yet. But allow users to really understand the functionality behind it before you kind of let it loose within the organization. I do believe that is a very useful tool to an extent. Obviously with universities, there's probably a lot of issues around whether or not students are allowed to use it to finish their projects, get their homework done. From a business perspective, I'm sure it's like, well, if you have a presentation coming up or a project, can I use AI to build something for that conference, for that project? And again, it's really useful, but if you have users that are leveraging it and are not educated on it, then it's just it's another dangerous tool. It's just like any tool out there that, we've been using for however long.
I want to tell you that the students love ChatGPT.
I'm sure they do.
Teachers hate it. The first set of emails I received, they block it. I said, how many of these platforms I'm going to block? There's already 600 plus out there already. So it's amazing what happens when a new tool arrives in any environment. This takes me back to the late 90s when www started, and people wanted to block internet. Those were the emails from teachers and principals. Peter, the kids are going to be all over it. We don't know how to detect it. Just block it. And we always took a stand. It's a teaching opportunity, learning opportunity for the students. Work on it and help them to actually how they're going to leverage this powerful tool. I think we're at the same stage now from an education side of things. But the businesses are exploring opportunities how they can leverage this tool. I don't know if Bulk Burn has dived deep into AI and anything is in place at this stage.
We don't have anything in place. I think for us, it's more important trying to understand our data. Create a data model, which basically, and then build a data model based on once we've kind of defined what our data model looks like. I think that's what we need to do first before we can introduce some of these tools internally. Because I think Bulk Burn definitely will benefit from, in how we engage with our customer from a loyalty standpoint. But again, it depends on what the use case is for each business is. And for Bulk Burn, we're still going through that investigation at the moment. So we have not.
I think it comes down to, it's a very similar aspect of establishing an insider threat program. You kind of have to understand your data set and what data you have access to or what data is floating around your organization before you introduce, a new program or a new tool set. And understanding your user base and who has access to that data and who's using that data and who's able to manipulate that data. So I think it's very similar in that sort of sense. If you want to use AI, great, but know what data sets you're giving it access to. Same thing, if you're establishing an insider threat program, understand your user base, understand the behaviors that those users are doing. And when those behaviors start to change or AI all of a sudden is giving you answers that you think, wait a second, how does it know these things? That's when you can start to question whether or not this tool is useful or if this program is successful or not.
By the way, Lynsey wasn't here for Chris' opening keynote, but you see the thought process. Do you know where your assets are? Who has access to it, right? Who's playing with it? Who shouldn't be playing with it? So same basic questions are coming back, right? So before we wrap up, I just wanted to see if there was any additional feedback or questions or thoughts from the room.
I have a question about travel and privacy and what sort of guidance do you have about employees with highly privileged access traveling to all parts of the world? How do we protect that? Or burner phones or?
Definitely. I'll try to answer it because we've been asked to wrap it up. So I think one of the best advice was that have a spare set of laptop or phones. When you know your individuals or user or stakeholder executives are traveling to these certain countries, that's what they carry. And when they come back, you tell them that you don't connect to anything. And that's the best way to keep it clean. But I found that not everyone tells you where they're going.
Right, and then privacy.
So it's double-edged sword. That's where it comes down to human intelligence piece. and also building a culture that security is not a job of few individuals, or you have a small team of 6, 7, 10 individuals working in the cybersecurity team. It's the entire organization. Everyone who gets a paycheck is equally responsible for the security of the organization, right? So I think that's the way we can collectively work towards normalizing it. I have never seen somebody telling me that all risks have been eliminated. There will always be a risk. The safest device is always the one we never turn on. We can't live like that. It has to be turned on and connected to the internet, right? So I know our time's up. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to the panel also.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.